Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of CTLN Opinion Plus, where we have conversations about issues and concerns of the Latino community. Today, we are joined by Tom Hennick, Public Education Officer of Connecticut Freedom of Information Commission. Thank you for joining us this week, Tom.
Happy to be here, Brian.
Absolutely. How are you doing today?
Doing just fine.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for joining us this week on CTLN Opinion Plus. To get started, we'll be asking a couple of questions about your role and just how have things been navigating during these unique times. Any questions before we begin?
No, we'll give it a shot. We'll see if we can keep it rolling, right?
Absolutely. So Tom, I wanted to ask just how has the pandemic impacted the work that you do with providing information to the residents of Connecticut?
Well, my particular role, I'm the public education officer, and Brian, my function is to answer a lot of questions. I typically take between 20 and 30 phone calls and emails a day, and then in addition to that, I do workshops all over the state. Last night I was in Niantic. Next week, I'm going to Woodstock. I'm going to Waterford. I'm going to Reading. I'm going to a lot of different places. And the idea is to try to help people understand what their rights, but also what their obligations are under freedom of information. And when you ask about the pandemic, obviously, especially for the first 12 to 14 months, we were pretty much locked in. So someone who's technologically deficient as I am had to learn how to do these workshops via Zoom, how to connect with people that way, how to retrieve phone calls from the office phone because we were working at home, no one to answer the phones, a lot of different things. And what was encouraging, Brian, is that a lot of folks still found us and still found that we're here to try to help them. So, but the pandemic clearly changed the paradigm that we operated in.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that you had to switch from in-person assistance to then virtual, to just virtual experiences into phone calls. Can you explain like how efficient were these like educational virtual experiences and just how like what were some of the biggest challenges of still providing your services, transitioning from in-person to a virtual and phone call experience?
Right. To me, Brian, I'm a little bit old school. I still feel that the in-person experience is better. You can interact with people. You can read body language. You know, if you're talking to a blank screen, a lot of times people in these workshops chose to turn their cameras off, which is kind of tough. You're basically talking to yourself for an hour. But you can see when you say something. For instance, the workshop I did last night, I made a point and I saw the chairman of this board wince, and I said, "So that based on your reaction, you're telling me that what I told you to do, you haven't been doing." She sort of nodded her head and said, "That's right." But if I weren't in person or if she had her camera off, I wouldn't have known that. And so we were able to go down the path of helping her fix the problem. If you're following, how this would go, and if I can't see her face, so a lot of times I have to push a little harder for questions, push a little harder for people to, say, "Look, don't worry about it. Just tell me what you were doing, and we can try to fix it." That was one of the biggest. That remains one of the biggest challenges because some folks still don't want to do the in-person workshops. They're still calling me and having me do them virtually. So
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And Tom, I'm interested more so with can you explain more like what are the most common reasons people seek your services what um what are the main issues that residents of Connecticut really face when they reach out to your services?
sure. Well, I just gave you that one component of what we do here at FOI. That's me, the education part. But the primary function of the FOI Commission is to make sure to guarantee that people have the rights that the FOI Act, which is 46 years old, uh, guarantees them. And so typically when people reach out, it's because they're not getting the records that they seek, or they're not being allowed to attend a meeting, or they think a board is meeting in secret. The idea behind our law is to make sure that everybody, public agencies, work in a transparent fashion. And people come to us when they believe that that's not happening. Another sort of, I mentioned the problems with my work in the pandemic, but with, offices closed, especially for most of 2020, um, when people believe they've been denied access, they file complaints with us, and then we ultimately hold hearings. But we weren't holding any hearings. So you look at a barrier for people getting the information, our commission holds a hearing and says, town of, whatever the town is, release that record. Well, if we're not in a position to have the hearing and order that record release, they're not getting the information they need. So that's another barrier. So we finally were able to set up a system whereby we could hold the hearings remotely as well. I'm not involved in that. I'm not an attorney. So the problem, of course, is that people are sort of chomping at the bit. They're not getting what they need. They're not getting the information that they need, and they're coming to us, maybe even a little more desperately, to try to get it.
Absolutely. So it seems like it seems more of just people just not understanding or not understanding the like the settings that they're working in, just like what do they have access to, and just they feel like they are not receiving the information that they so do desire, and that's where they reach out to your services.
Right. For instance, someone will go to a police department and want records of a specific incident, and the police department might not produce it, and they might come to us and say the police department is not giving me those records. Please help. So they would, sort of file a complaint against that police department with us, and we'd try to help them sort it out. But if you ask about, then there was a lot of concern about, well, are they still open? Can we still get help from them? Some departments said, you know what, during the pandemic, we're not even going to pay attention to freedom of information requests. So all of that becomes problematic.
Interesting. So, like with that being said, can you explain more like what specific obstacles do underrepresented communities such as the Latinx or Black communities face when reaching out to your services, or just what influenced them to reach out to your services? If you see any differences with underrepresented communities seeking out your services.
Yeah, Brian, to be candid, we recognized that several years ago, and we started several outreach programs. We have one of our attorneys is bilingual, and she's gone out into the communities, gone to fairs, gone to churches to try to expand our base, if you will. We find a lot of times that you use the word underrepresented. We find that those communities sometimes don't even realize that we exist, and when they run into a situation where they want to deal with government, they don't realize what rights they have, that they have a right to ask for the document, or that they have a right to go to the meeting where the application for the big box store is going up in their neighborhood, that they have a right to be players in that. So what we try to do is get out. Most of the workshops I do, Brian, are for public agencies, for people so that they know what they're supposed to do. But this outreach that we do is for the common folk, for all people, so that they know that they have the right to press their public agencies to involve them.
Very interesting. So it seems like they just don't know that you exist. Are you doing any, like, as an organization, are you doing anything to kind of make your name more present within these underrepresented communities so that more people know that you exist, and that more people from underrepresented communities like know that you are a big resource that can help them understand their rights and what they are allowed to do?
Again, those programs that I mentioned that we're doing, you talk about the impact of the pandemic. Some of them had to be stopped because the churches weren't having their weekly sessions, or the fairs that we went to. We went to a fair in the city of Hartford many years, and they didn't have it the last 2 years because of the pandemic. So our hope is that some of these avenues will open up again, and we'll be able to get out there and pursue some of this outreach that we started up several years ago.
Absolutely. So that's all really those are all really good ways to kind of like make your name more present and to again like practice the action of outreach. But I'm also really curious too, besides the pandemic, the issues of social injustice and how the concept of diversity, equity, inclusivity with trying to make environments more equal and more just. Did these issues of social injustice within the past several years influence the way people reach out to your services, or just how you work with people of color, people of different backgrounds with your circle and within your environment?
Right. I think not necessarily as a direct sort of correlation, but I think what happens is when we get out there and people find what we do and what we are, they say, wait a minute, I can make a freedom of information request of this public agency for instance, the diversity plan that they're implementing, and that maybe getting that information helps me work, work on the bigger problem, work on the bigger issue. So I don't know that we're directly involved, but the ability to get people more information as to what goes on, I think that's where we might sort of play a role. And let me give us a plug here. If any of your listeners, any of your viewers have ideas for us as a way to reach some of these communities, by all means contact us. We're all ears. We try very hard to get our name out there as much as possible with all communities in Connecticut.
Absolutely, absolutely. So can you then explain, so you've always talked about like offering these educational programs. Can you kind of mention some of the names of these programs or some resources that you think our audience should know so that in case if they need to reach out to your services?
Well, it's really just the ones that we do are really just basic programs. We like to call them Freedom of Information 101, FOI 101. And it's just go out and basically go through the nuts and bolts, go through the basics of what our law is about with people who are interested in knowing about it. And that it can be as long or as short or as detailed. When we go out and talk to folks who aren't well versed in the law, we try to keep it simple. Again, I mentioned I'm not an attorney. I don't use a lot of legal terms. The idea is to get as many people in Connecticut who want to know how to utilize our law to keep them and make them involved citizens.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I guess like kind of going off of that is, so can you explain a little bit more of kind of the direction you want this organization to go? Is it simply more of just making yourself more well known and just practicing more outreach? And if so, then what else do you hope to accomplish within the future besides just more knowing and more knowledge of the community of your resources?
Right. What we also want hand in hand with that is to make sure that the public agencies follow the law. I mean, the reality is that public agencies don't like to operate, for the most part, in public. It's easier to do their work in private. So we have to get them to understand that the law requires them to be transparent, to work in public. And so it's sort of a twofold goal: get more people involved, let more people be knowledgeable about what the law guarantees them, but also the public agencies to understand that it's their obligation. It's not just some really neat idea. It's their obligation to make sure that they're transparent. So because the people are paying the freight, and so the democracy only works if people know what's going on, Brian. And you probably know that. And so that's the message we try to get to both sides so that we get more involvement.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Tim. That does really put the nail on the head as you want as many people to work in the public versus private, and that democracy works if everybody knows how it works and not just
Right.
a select few people. So with that, we are approaching time. I would like to ask if you would like to say anything else, any last minute comments or resources for our audience before we depart.
Well, again, go to our website if you're interested, foi@ct.gov. But also, if you're interested, if you're in a community situation where you're interested in a workshop, just call. Or if you have questions, you now have a face to put with a voice on the other end of the phone. I'll talk to you. I'll try to get you answers. They're not orders or commands. We basically try to give you the tools to work with so that freedom of information becomes your friend, so that it's something that helps you become a knowledgeable and involved citizen. So my word would be, use us. That's what this law is for. It was Ella Grasso's brainchild when she put it in play 46 years ago, and that's what we're here for.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tim, for joining us this afternoon.
Delighted. Thank you.
And join us for another episode in 2 weeks. For more information about our discussion today, check out our web story on ctlatinonews.com. Follow us at Twitter at CT News and our Instagram at CT _Latino News. I'm Brian Zapata with CTLN and Opinion Plus, and we'll see you next time.